Hi there, welcome to Grow Your Own with Kyle Cushman. So, you want to grow your own marijuana? No problem. Maybe you're tired of paying too much for your medicine. Perhaps you've retired and want to try something else in your garden. Something that takes you back to the peace-loving spirit of the 60s. Maybe, like me, you just love the herb. Whatever your reasons for growing your own cannabis, you've come to the right place. With the help of THC Design in downtown Los Angeles, this beginner's guide will show you all the basics, step by easy step. How to turn an empty space into a productive garden. How to turn a few seeds into budding plants. And those plants into high-quality, delicious flower. With me on your side, you'll be growing your own delicious weed in no time. I'm heading over to 55 Hydroponics on Boyd Street, Santa Ana. If you live in SoCal, you might have seen the sign on the 55 in Orange County. I'm betting they'll have all the equipment I need to show you how to build your own grow from scratch. Setting up a grow can be a daunting task, especially when you're just starting out. Every grower has different needs and requirements, but I want to show you the products I think will help you to a great start. The first thing to consider for an indoor grow is your grow tent. You could always turn a garage or shed into a virtual tent, but you'll have to construct a sealed environment. Using a tent minimizes construction. When choosing your grow tent, you want to ask yourself a few questions. How much space do I have? How many plants do I want to grow? And what's my budget? So, we need a tent to grow just 6 plants in. What are our options?
Okay, we got a couple options right here. We got 4x4 tent, a Gorilla, and then a Bud Box Pro, which would be perfect for growing 6 plants.
Good old Gorilla, they've been around for a while. I know that the Bud Box, I happen to be using them because they're the only ones with zippers on the side.
Correct.
So if you have like a rectangular place to set it in, where the walls are going to be tight, you're going to need to use the Bud Box. The lighting landscape has changed drastically since I started out. Back then, the best lights were vertical HIDs with 4-panel parabolic reflectors. Now, you can choose anything from ceramic metal halides to high-pressure sodium HIDs, LED to plasma. It's mostly like a cook, deciding on the number of plants you're growing, whether you're vegging or flowering, what type of plants, and of course, your budget. It's not just the cost of the lights you need to consider, you have to think about your utility bills too. One of the most important pieces of equipment that we're going to buy for our tent is our light.
Correct.
And we have a light here that you've chosen to talk about.
Yeah, so this light here gives you a lot of options, whether you want to expand to a bigger size tent or keep it in that 4x4 tent. You could adjust the wattage, use lower wattage bulb. That comes with a 1,000-watt bulb. This here is a 600-watt bulb that will work perfectly fine in that size tent and fixture. Nice,
and that's why they call it a switchable, because it has a little dial here on the side. You can dial up the wattage. Now you can actually run a 1,000-watt bulb and dial it down, but that's not the best way to go about it because the spectrum changes. So you can actually get a different bulb to match the wattage. That way you get the proper light spectrum. It also runs on different voltages, 110 and 220. They've also developed brand new double-ended CMH bulbs as well.
Correct.
So if you want to try a CMH run, you can do that as well. I love that. Flexibility is always nice.
All right, what do you think? In some veganics?
Of course veganics. We're going to use Vegan Matrix. You know it gives you the best taste.
Yeah, of course.
Let's fill her up.
Let's load it up.
It's really important to control the level of humidity within your grow. The best way to do this is to match nature, keeping the humidity up during the day, but down at night. This is known as vapor pressure deficit, or VPD. For this, you need good, reliable appliances that are Energy Star compliant, so you won't spend too much coin on power. So now, Sergio, we're standing in front of a couple of appliances. We got a humidifier and a dehumidifier.
Correct.
Give us a little information why both are important.
All right, so we want to run the humidifier mainly during the day because it's going to help with the plant. They really like the humidity to help it grow much faster. But in the night, we want to run the dehumidifier because too much of that humidity could actually cause mold and powdery mildew issues, which we want to avoid.
This is pretty standard. We've seen these in our homes. This is a really neat little unit. It creates like a fog. I have one at home in my tent. The only thing about these things are they either have to be plumbed or you have to constantly empty them. In the case of a dehumidifier, you're going to have to empty out the water. In the case of the humidifier, you're going to have to add water to it.
Yes, sir.
So you can work that out with some simple tools if you want to plumb them, and then you won't have to worry about that. So there you have your humidifier and your dehumidifier appliances. We have some soils here. What are our choices over there?
All right, so over here we got some amended soil and some unamended soil.
I generally prefer the unamended soil. I like ProMix. It works really well with Vegan Matrix because you feed with every watering. The amended soils, they're really good too. They have an initial charge. You're not going to have to water for the first couple of weeks.
Right.
Then you're going to have to kind of monitor to see how much food you got to put in. So now we also have CO2 tanks. Yes. I generally use the tanks, but we got these products here. Tell me about these.
Yeah, so with the CO2 tank, you got to get a regulator, got to get a controller. With these options here, all you got to do is add water to this one, shake it up, place it in your room, you're ready to go. Same thing with this one. You inoculate the substrate with the mushroom spores, hang it in your room, and both will raise your ambient CO2 about 500 ppm.
I love that. Man, this is a lot lighter than those heavy steel tanks.
A lot lighter?
I'm going to have to give it a try.
Awesome.
Getting the right equipment is vital to a successful grow. It can be hard to stay within your budget, especially if you're growing for the first time. But there are some amazing high-quality products available that won't break the bank. Besides soil and newts, these are all one-time purchases. Take good care of them, and they'll be with you grow after grow after grow. In the next video, I'll show you how to create the perfect setup. You'll be one step closer to growing your own. Cannabis plants have spent millions of years using the sun's energy to convert CO2 and water into food. This is photosynthesis. What an amazing job they do. Without our symbiotic relationship with trees, there wouldn't be enough oxygen to sustain human life, much less all our animal friends. Nobody to smoke the weed, nobody to invent the amazing lights for us to grow trees. We nourish them, they nourish us back. Give us medicine and get us high. It's a wonderful relationship. We're going to focus on the following lights: fluorescent, LED, metal halide, and high pressure sodium. Once you understand the capabilities of each of these light sources, you'll know exactly which light will best suit your grow. Fluorescent lights are great for the early stages of your plant's life. I definitely root my clones under them, but try to move on as quickly as possible. They're cheap, come in all shapes and sizes, and you can buy them everywhere. From 2-foot shop lights at the local hardware store for around 20 bucks, to 8-bulb, 4-foot T5 fluorescent banks that cost around 300 bucks. They're very efficient in terms of operating cost, they're low heat and take up little space. That said, the T5s and all fluorescents are limited and rarely used for continuous veg or flowering, unless you're happy with smaller yields. And I'm talking one-hit nugs. You know what I mean? The later stages of growth need power. And this is where traditionally metal halides and high-pressure sodiums, known as HIDs, come in. HID stands for high intensity discharge. Very powerful and pretty efficient. But their heat signature is significant. Significant enough that back in the day, they used to fly helicopters equipped with heat imaging cameras to find and bust growers. HIDs deliver big yields, but they require attention. Virtually all modern HID lights are interchangeable and convertible. In the old days, a grower needed separate ballasts for halide and sodium lamps. You also needed the ballasts wired for the proper voltage. Nowadays, the ballasts accommodate lamps from 400 to 1,000 watts, halide or sodium. Plus, they automatically configure their electronics to 110 or 220 volts. All HIDs come integrated with ballast and hood already in the box. Be sure to check for the bulb. Some include them and some don't. The big drawbacks to HID are power consumption and heat. You'll need equipment to cool your grow room, and you'll need to pay your bills. We're taught that halides are for vegging and sodiums are for flowering. Like I said, this mimics the color change of the seasons. This works well with HIDs that honestly were designed to light up parking lots, highways, and stadiums, not to grow plants. New HIDs, however, have been tweaked for the cultivation industry, which leads me to LEDs. Improvements in LED technology have been exponential. Since I've just pulled off my best LED crop yet, I'll venture to guess that in a few more years, the entire industry will be lit by LEDs. The newest generation of lights are based on the principle that all plants, no matter where they are on the planet, perform the same exact biological functions. They do this best when the sun is strong and directly overhead. Ipso facto, the best light for rapid photosynthesis is the light spectrum you see when you walk outside into bright summer sun, daylight, which is predominantly blue-white, with just a touch of red, which happens to suit the human eye perfectly. When it comes to lighting, it seems to me and NASA that plants grow, flower, and fruit best under natural lighting conditions. Bright blue-white color of mid-summer. Natural daylight on its own has enough red to produce full, ripe, resinous flowers. But back to LEDs. Vegging and flowering with the same light surely is a game changer when you're a commercial gardener. Imagine having to move hundreds or even thousands of plants from one grow room to another, or changing hundreds of light bulbs. It seems they really are the future of the industry. Lights are an essential factor in determining the success of your indoor grow. But good equipment isn't enough. You need to know how to use it. When to switch cycles is of ultimate importance. Use a timer, keep good records, most important of all, be observant. Learn the language of your plants, and you'll come to know exactly how to prevent your plants from getting sad. And more importantly, the things you can do to make your plants pray high to the sky. I'm going to show you a few of the basics when it comes to setting up your indoor grow. First, let's talk power, your electricity requirements. Pre-installed outlets might have enough power to plug in all the lights and appliances. This all depends on the size of your grow. You may find the need to install an additional sub-panel to deliver the extra juice. Whatever you decide on, don't overload any one outlet. Best case, you blow a fuse or circuit. Worst case scenario, you burn down the building. I can't stress enough, don't play with electricity. When in doubt, always ask or hire a professional. Start off with a clean space. Yes, actually use cleaning products. Now, it's time to set up the tent. Setting up a grow tent isn't rocket science. Lay out the shell, poles, and connectors properly, then go to YouTube for actual video instructions. It can be a little tricky, even frustrating on your own, so I suggest you find a helping hand. Once your tent is built, it'll be solid and secure. Now it's time to hang your lights. I always use adjustable ratchet hangers. No more chains and S-hooks. Adjustable hangers work great for other equipment too, or your drying line, all sorts of things. They adjust quickly and easily. Unless you plan to give your plants continuous light throughout their entire cycle, lights will need to be turned on and off with the precision of a clock. This thing is your new best friend. It will prevent all sorts of trouble, from insomnia to hermaphroditism. Set it and forget it. The next big appliance you'll add is your dehumidifier. The best units come with nifty adapters that make it easy to exhaust the heat coming out of the unit. Run all appliances for a pre-check to make sure everything is sealed up tight and hung properly. Then you can zip tie or hide away all the cords. Air movement is vital. Fans take up space, so you have to use your ingenuity. You can also secure wall mount oscillating fans if you choose. Always maintain a clean workspace, removing all debris like dead leaves, branches, and leftover nutrient solution. If left around, these things can encourage pests and plant diseases. Next thing of supreme importance is record keeping. Take as many notes as you can about watering, lamp height, and of course, the day you switch to flowering. All right, here we go. Got ourselves a beaker here. Got ourselves a little purified water. Pour that in there. Magic ingredient, just a little bit of liquefied seaweed. You just want 1 drop. Boop. And then we're gonna get down to the bottom because it's kind of thick and mix it up. So you've got a nice little color coming to the water now. So that's all mixed up. Okay. Keep your hands nice and clean. I like to keep my hands nice and clean. Take our seeds, pop them open. Smells good. Pour those puppies in. Again, give it a little stir. We're gonna let those sit there for 24 to 48 hours. Okay, here we are. We've soaked the seeds overnight, and now we're gonna put them on to a paper plate. Now there are as many ways to sprout seeds as there are people who do it. This is just the way that I prefer to do it. I've done it for 30-something years, and I get really good results this way. Sometimes you're in a hot climate, sometimes you're in a cold climate. This makes it easy. So take at least 2 sheets of paper towel, 2 or 3. No ink or pretty flower patterns on them. And you're gonna square it off real quick, doesn't have to be perfect. Take the 4 corners in and put it on the middle of the plate, just like that. And we're gonna take some of this water and we're gonna moisten it. Moisten it, we're gonna moisten it. All right, here come the seeds. Boom, 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 boom. There they are. We're gonna wait for the rest of these to sprout. So you wanna spread these out so that they're not touching, very gently. And then you take the covering, and now it's gonna soak up all that extra water. All you gotta worry about is that there's no freestanding water under the plate. So you lift up the bottom, tilt it, no water coming off. This is nice and soaked. In fact, it'll hold just a little bit more water. And look at that, I have just the trick. Pour the rest of that water on there. Now you're gonna leave this in a warm, dark place. If you don't have a warm, dark place, on top of the refrigerator will work. The silverware drawer in the kitchen sometimes I've used before. I've used my sock drawer before. And then every 12 to 24 hours, you're gonna check back to make sure that the paper towels are still wet. You want them to stay moist. They don't have to be soaked, but they can't ever dry. Keep those seeds wet. And then we're gonna leave those for 24 to 48 hours. Come on back. Well, what do you know? 48 hours have gone by, and looky what we have here. Beautiful little sprouts. That's a taproot, baby. So that's your first root. That's what makes seeds so special over clones. Clones don't have a taproot. Here's one that didn't sprout at all. You know, occasionally you get a dud. You know, it's nature. You don't want to plant that one. Give it another day. She'll probably sprout. In the next video, I'll show you the best way to plant your germinated seeds. We're putting some seeds in the ground. Planting is always a happy time. So we have these lovely seeds here, 3 beautiful sprouted seeds. And the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna fill our solo cups up with soil. Make sure you don't have any clods or clumps. And just simply fill up your cup with soil. A few taps on the bottom. You don't wanna ever pack your soil. Leave a little 1/2 inch from the top. 1. You want to put a couple of holes in the bottom for drainage to make sure that you don't have any freestanding water in the bottom of the cup. Probably want to make up our water because you don't want to water after you put the seed in because it'll float out of position. So we're just going to put a little Vegan Matrix Grow in there, about a teaspoon. About a quick stir. Seeds don't need much. You just want to make sure there's some nutrient in the soil. This is a neutral soil. There's no nutrient charge in here. So I'm just giving it a little bit of nitrogen to make sure that they're happy. All right, we got the cups ready, filled with soil. We moistened it up, over moistened it just a little bit. That's okay, we'll clean it up later. Now we got our seeds. Look at those 3 lovely germinated seeds. So what I'm going to do is very carefully pick one up so that I can angle that taproot straight down into the ground, perpendicular. I'm just going to make a hole roughly the size of the taproot because I don't want to bury or lose the seed. And I'm just going to put it right in the center so it's standing straight up, and I'm going to move soil around it. Seed shell is just covered up. It's literally a 1/16 of an inch underneath the soil. So now we're going to take the second one, just like that. We're just going to make a little bit of an indentation there, and I'm going to stand that puppy straight up like that. And then I'm just going to move the soil around it and just literally build a tiny little mound around it right there. Now you're always going to know where that seed is. It's right there, right in the center. You're going to rip yourself off a piece of plastic, put it over the cup, put yourself a rubber band, and now you got yourself a little terrarium, and you're not going to have to water this until you see green coming up to the plastic. 4 or 5 holes. Now if you didn't put that plastic on top, the soil right near the top obviously would go dry. And since the seed is right near the top, now it won't. It's going to be very, very happy. It's also going to raise the temperature in there a little bit to more of a jungle terrarium type temperature, and sprouts like warmer temperatures. Okay, so you've got these all planted up. The best thing to do with these is put them under fluorescence. They really don't need any light at the moment. What they need is warmth. But as soon as they pop up, they're going to need light. So if you've got a bank of fluorescents or T5s, that's perfect. Put them under there, about 6-12 inches away from them, and leave them on 24 hours. And within 24 to 48 hours, you're going to see your first set of green leaves. The pod's going to open up. And that's when you take the plastic off, and you're going to be very, very happy. Now they're going to come up and they're going to want to touch this plastic. So as soon as you see green, you take the plastic off. And that's when you want to make sure you feed them properly and give them proper light. So that's when you want to make sure that the light stays close if they're fluorescents. They probably should stay under fluorescence for a good week or two before you move them on to anything more powerful. Let them get a couple of inches in height, and they can stay in here for about a week or two, depending on how fast they grow. So these here, I'm going to put these into my veg tent under my LED, little 100-watt LED. For about a week or two, I would transplant them when they get to about 3 or 4 inches tall. By their second or third set of leaves, you should certainly want to transplant them into a larger pot. Feeding and watering your plants is crucial to a successful grow. It's just as easy to overwater as it is to overwhelm your plant with too many nutrients. Today, I'm going to talk about different growing mediums, nutrients, and water. How much to feed, when to water, and how to be responsive to your plant. Let's start with the growing medium. You can choose from soil, natural materials like sphagnum and cocoa. They can even be certified organic. Or you can grow hydroponically, which literally means without soil, using materials like rock wool or pea gravel. If you choose soil, you'll decide between something inert like ProMix or a super soil with preloaded nutrients. 2 great super soil recipes are Subcool's and my own veganic mix. After deciding on your soil, you have to choose your nutrients. There are many choices. I'm obviously going to suggest using Vegan Matrix or at least something organic. Do some research. If you're using my VSS, Veganic Super Soil, for example, you'll still need to add newts, but only at 50% of the recommended dose on the feed chart. For Subcool soil, you just add water. Let me say this again in case you missed it. Follow the feeding schedule provided by the nutrient manufacturer you're using. Your plant's needs may change quickly, so always make notes. Now, let's talk about watering. I found the best way to water your plants is to cycle wet to dry. There are certain times your plants will require smaller partial waterings, but I'll discuss these in the transplanting video. Cycling involves watering to complete saturation, then allowing the pot to almost completely dry before watering again. This will encourage the most prolific root system. Again, observation is key. Gain the ability to recognize the weight of both a fully watered pot and an almost dry pot, and the process becomes easy. Cycling keeps roots constantly searching and growing. Each time the moisture recedes, the root system will improve, creating a solid root ball. Adding nutrients can affect the pH of the soil, so check your inputs and runoff regularly. Optimal pH for soil gardening is around 6.5, so make sure your inputs are between 6.2 to 6.7. For hydroponics, optimal pH is around 6.2, and for cocoa, it's closer to 5.8. The pH balance of the soil affects how well your plants absorb nutrients. If the pH is too far off, you'll quickly notice signs of deficiency like yellowing leaves. Anything more than 3 or 4 tenths outside the optimal range and your plants will struggle, like trying to drink liquid through a collapsed straw. If the pH level of your nutrient solution is too low, adjust by using a pH up product, adding just a little at a time until you hit your mark. If the pH is a little high as 7, I suggest you don't adjust. Organic media always acidifies over time. That said, if your inputs consistently come in very high, you can adjust down to 6.5 to 6.7. Another thing to monitor is the ppm, or parts per million, of your water. This represents the level of dissolved solids in the solution. Monitoring input numbers and comparing them to runoff numbers is one way to know if you're over or under feeding. Different stages of the grow have different acceptable ppm levels. Checking your input levels is easy, but you also need to check the runoff. Do this by adding a little extra water for the feed and measuring the excess that runs out of the pot. If your ppms are too high, alternate in a few plain waterings and note the numbers as they fall. If it's too low, simply move up a notch on the feeding chart. In conclusion, watering and the application of nutrients is of supreme importance. Try not to overdo anything. When plants are young, they require very little of anything. Too much water or newts can really stress them out. The best thing you can do for your plants is to check on them regularly, get to know them, and the timing of their wet-dry cycles and how this changes as they grow. Keeping the pH and the ppm levels as optimum as possible. Getting these details right will give you a far better chance of success. Remember, knowledge is power. In the next video, we'll look at transplanting, when and how to do it. Your first real transplant will take place 1 week to 10 days after planting. You'll need to decide whether to move your seedlings to their final home or an intermediate pot. An intermediate pot gives you more chances to perfect cycling your plants wet to dry with your feeding and watering. You'll become used to how much your plants drink and how much a dry versus a thirsty pot weighs. I highly recommend this route for beginners. Transplanting from seedling straight to your final pot is recommended once you have some experience, or if the pot you're finishing up in is pretty small, in the 1 to 3 gallon range. My preferred method is planting into dry medium and water after, removing the potential for waste, and it's much easier to clean up dry soil. Any leftover dry soil can go straight back into the bag. When preparing your pots, never pack your soil. You want the first watering to be able to move around and fully saturate rather than find the path of least resistance. When planting, the aim is to seat the new plant without spaces or gaps in the media. And successive waterings compact the soil naturally. It will make watering easier and produce a better root structure. Make sure to leave room for watering. Never fill soil up to the rim, or you'll find yourself pouring a sip, then waiting over and over, or constantly overflowing nutrient solution on the floor. If you are moving seedlings to their final home, I have a good tip to make sure they shoot roots everywhere, rather than stunt out. For the first few waterings, including the initial watering, saturate the media to only 50%, concentrating on a column down the center. Slowly water all around the seedling, keeping about half the distance from the rim to the plant. Plants will immediately shoot roots down as far as they can. Never let the media dry completely. The first few times you re-moisten, apply only 50%. Once you see roots protruding from the bottom, you can start the wet to dry cycling as detailed in my feeding video. A few more tips. Your soil must now be charged with food, either by using a nutrified soil or adding nutrients regularly. Stick to your feeding plan. If you're transplanting into nutrified soil, you might not need additional nutes for a few weeks. Super soil, not at all. Follow the feeding plan you chose and you should be okay. But always observe your plants. Purple stems, yellow or mottled leaves at this stage indicates a lack of nutrients or the inability of the plants to uptake nutrients because the pH is off. A few weeks after the initial transplant is when you want to increase the nutes. This is where you can really push them and get them to produce what large-scale commercial agriculture calls greenhouse tip. This slight tip burn lets you know that plants are full of nitrogen and you've reached max feeding level. Okay, when do you want to move from an intermediate to a final pot? Within 2 to 3 weeks, depending on light source, strain, and overall health. Your plants will have doubled to triple in size and have developed substantial roots and foliage. Make sure the root ball is relatively dry before transplant. A wet root ball will fall apart under its own weight. If you're transplanting into a pot 3 or 4 times the size of your intermediate pot, your first watering should follow the same half saturation pattern I spoke of earlier. A nice central column of water for the first couple of waterings and then cycle wet to dry. This will give you an amazing root structure and a strong, vigorous plant. One more tip before we go. Avoid flipping your plant for at least a week after transplanting. Let your plant move into all the fresh soil and settle into its new home. It'll thank you for it later on. Today, we're talking about flipping your plants. I don't mean flipping them physically, I mean flipping them from vegetative into flowering phase. Basically, flipping your plants and when to flip your plants is the biggest determining factor of your overall yield. Because once you flip them, they stop vegging and they turn all their energy to growing and producing flower. Sometimes the difference between your yield doubling can simply be a week or two of vegging. What do you want to think about when you're deciding to flip? The first thing is how much space you have. Obviously, you don't want to outgrow your environment. The next thing you want to think about is what type of yield are you looking to get? You can't get 4 ounces off of a 1-foot plant, but you can get 4 ounces off of a 2-foot plant or a 2.5-foot plant. Everything needs to be sized to the space that you have. I'll give you a little bit of a guideline. So when you do flip your plants, they're going to double to triple in height from the time you flip them until the time that bud set occurs. And that's when the flowers are on the plants and they basically stopped stretching. They're going to grow about an equal amount in width as well. So if you flower a 1-foot plant, you're going to end up with a 2 to 3 foot tall plant at the end. That's the major consideration. You don't want to grow into your lights. So when we're talking about flipping the plants from vegetative into flowering, what we're actually talking about is flipping the photoperiod. And the photoperiod is a fancy word for saying how many hours of light and how many hours of dark. Most plants need around 12 hours of consecutive darkness to get them to flip. And this doesn't happen in 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. It's consecutive days. So it's the number of hours of darkness that are going to cause the plants to switch from veg into flowering. And after about a week, certainly within a week, you're going to start to see those little white hairs, the pistils as we call them. So those white hairs are going to stack by the thousands and they're going to grow into what we call buds. And eventually those buds are going to join and they're going to form colas. Once you start seeing those red hairs, good to have one of these lighted loops. This is a magnifier. And this is how you're going to tell when the plants are ripe. Today, we're talking about ripening. Ripening those lovely buds that you spent so much time growing. How do you know when it's ripe? Well, just like a piece of fruit, there's a peak time for ripening. A little bit too soon, not so good. A little bit too late, not so good. So how do you tell? The most important thing is that we have a calendar and you mark down the day when you switch to flowering. That day is going to be the best indicator of when your particular strain of marijuana is going to be ripe and ready for harvest. So when you start getting close and you see those red hairs coming in, that's when you're going to pull out one of these things. This wonderful little lighted loop right here, it's a magnifier. You're going to hold that up and look at the trichomes. Now when you first look at those trichomes, which by the way look like little tiny mushrooms, perfectly clear. And then when you get close to ripening, maybe a week or two out, they're going to begin to turn opaque, kind of cloudy or milky. That lets you know you're getting pretty close. Now the last few times that you check are the most important of all. And you want to make sure that you always look at the trichomes, or mite the trikes as I like to say, from a point of the plant that is on the interior. Something that hasn't been rubbed or brushed by walking through the garden, because that could also turn the trichomes brown. So when you look in again and you're getting close to ripening, those opaque trichomes are going to begin to turn amber or brown, just like a ripe piece of fruit. And when about 5 to 10% of those trichomes have reached the amber color, you've reached perfect ripening. And that's when it's time to harvest. Today, I'm going to talk about the most exciting stage of your grow, the harvest. Hopefully, you've taken notes from my ripening video, observed the trichomes, and cross-referenced your flowering time. Now, it's time to cut down your plants and hang them to dry. So, what's the best way to do this? And what are the things you need to do during the last few weeks before harvest? If you haven't already, remove all the large water leaves from the plant. These leaves aren't attached to buds, they're attached to the branches and the main stem. Personally, I like to keep a few of the bigger leaves only as indicators. They'll alert me to any problems with the plant. In addition, by completely defoliating, that is snipping every leaf attached to the plant by a stem, you'll give the lower buds more direct light, allowing them to mature. This is the time you must stop spraying your plants. Foliar applications of any kind can entice molds, and you don't want any residual chemicals on or around the buds. Flushing your plants before harvest is a must, especially when using chemical fertilizers. This means gradually cutting out the nutrients during the final few weeks. With bottled newts, your feed chart should follow a similar timetable to the following. In week 5 or 6 of flowering, you should stop feeding nitrogen. 3 weeks from harvest, eliminate all micronewts, including CalMag, and cut your bloom phosphorus nutrient to half strength. 2 weeks from harvest, feed only water and enzymes to break down the leftover nutrients. The last week before harvest is straight water. Now you're golden. If you've been using super soil, your plants have been getting plain water all along. But you can finish them with a dose of enzymes and/or microbial tea. Another good tip is to make sure you stop watering 1 to 2 days before harvest without letting your plants completely dry. You don't want to harvest a wilted plant. The last thing is preparing your drying room. It could be a closet, the tent you grew in. Whatever space you decide on, it needs to be dark and not subject to drastic temperature swings. You want the space to be cool. 68 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit is optimal, with a humidity level around 50 to 60%. This will allow flowers to dry slowly. You can use a dehumidifier, but as passively as possible. Use the appliance to remove excess humidity from the air without drawing moisture from the plant. The same goes for fans. You want some air circulation, but never aim the fans directly at the plants. You don't want them blow dry. Now everything is ready, it's time to cut down the plants. It's best to cut down and dry the whole plant. Cutting it into smaller pieces makes everything dry too rapidly to deliver the best smoke. The plants can lightly touch each other when you hang them, as they'll soon shrink. You want to hang them for 7 to 10 days, 2 weeks at the most. This will provide optimal smokability. And there you have it, Harvesting 101. So you've got your plants hanging in your nice climate-controlled environment. How long do you want to let them hang? 7 to 10 days is your general rule of thumb, maybe 14 days at most. So how do I tell when it's time to take them off? You're going to have to use touch. When you feel the flowers, the leaves are going to get all nice and crispy, but you want to focus on the actual flower and the bud. When you squeeze into it, you want to make sure that there's still some spring left to it. so that when you take it down and manicure it, it still is going to continue to dry and it won't completely dry out, leaving you with a pile of dust. As you get closer to wanting to take the flowers off, you're going to check the stems. Stems need to snap before you remove them. Not snap like in half, but snap like a little crack rather than bend. And then finally, you're going to take those flowers and you're going to try to remove it from the stem. And you're going to get a little snap from the stem, and then that little piece of hemp is going to run along as you try to pull it off. And that shows there's still some water left in the stem. Perfect time for bucking and getting ready for trimming. Before you do that first seal, you want to do a smoke test, because that's what's going to ultimately tell you whether you can actually seal the buds up or not. By taking a bud and rolling it up into a joint and lighting it, if that joint stays lit, that's a pretty good indicator that you can seal those buds up. Some of the best containers are small Rubbermaids, but for curing for the final thing, you always want to use a glass jar. Fill the jars completely to the top. There's going to be lots of gaps. You don't want to leave too much oxygen in there. Break down the buds as much as you can, leaving as little stem on them as possible. Fill those jars, giving a nice shake so that they settle down a little bit. Then you just close that jar up, leave it for a couple of days, crack it open, and if you smell candy, close that sucker up, leave it for as long as you like. If you smell a little bit of ammonia, well, you put it in the jar a little bit too soon. You gotta dump it out, dry it all out. Your curing is over for this time. Next time, remember, check it a little bit sooner, a little bit less moisture. Curing is an art form. You'll get better every time you do it. It's always worth the cure, because cured weed is so much better than uncured weed. We'll see you again soon.